Ooh. Hello and welcome to Simon's Discoveries. So, I need to start over because I've been recording this video in Polish and I completely forgot my other and main channel is actually all in English, so I'm gonna have to take you back in time. So, we came here to Idaho about a week ago and started preparing for our wilderness experience, which is to stay in the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness for a month using only old-fashioned mountain man era equipment. So as you can see, I'm wearing right now wool sweater, wool scarf, wool trousers, wool pants, and leather moccasins. Everything is, well, not any specific period appropriate, but it is basically from the era just before, or even earlier, before World War I. So that means no plastic, no modern equipment, the things that we know from today's camping, like fishing lines and all that, we had to replace a lot of this with the things used back in the day. Some of it was almost impossible to impossible, and we just decided that the things that don't give us a huge advantage and are small, nearly invisible, well, they can stay, as long as replacing them would mean spending way too much money and it would be impractical. So that's what we did. But this is our, let's say, training camp. We've stayed here for 2 days. This is our second day, and we're trying to acclimatize to the conditions. As you can see, the night was frosty, so it was definitely below freezing. And coming from California, well, I felt like I needed some time to adjust here. And not just me, but my friend Rafał. He had to, well, we had to figure out some things, you know. Especially I myself have not done anything this extreme before. So today we're going to pack our things, leave the plastic things which are allowed on the training camp. We still have some modern equipment, nylon stuff, plastic bags and bear cans and stuff like that. This was allowed in the training camp because obviously, like I said, we had to adjust. So this is the end of adjustment. We won't even be using flashlights unless it's an emergency. And of course we'll have first aid kits and stuff like this, but we won't be using them unless we really need them. We want to, you know, experience the nature, but we don't necessarily want to die in this beautiful wilderness. Behind us is the river of Salmon River, the river of no return. So we need to go through our things, decide what we leave behind and what we take with us. And we're going to take 2 turns because our equipment turns out to be so heavy that it would be much more efficient and easier to use a mule to carry this to our main camp. It's going to be about 4 days walk, I think, but we're going to be walking back and forth carrying our equipment because we decided to split it in 2. Originally it weighs about 92 pounds each. That includes weapons, black powder weapons, that includes everything else, food and clothes. So even going for about 3-4 miles with this kind of thing, this kind of weight on a narrow and steep path, is just not really something I'm looking forward to, and that's just not just my opinion on that matter. So we both decided we're going to split it. We're going to go about 3 miles one way, drop it off, come back for the rest of it, and bring it to the camp for the day. And keep on doing that for about 4 days until we reach, maybe 5, until we reach the main camp, which we're going to build, stay there, start hunting, and do all those good things, enjoy ourselves, and see how we fare in even lower temperatures, because this is relatively mild. We are down in the valley, which apparently is where animals winter when it's really bad, because it's pretty mild in here. It's pretty warm compared to other places. And we're going to go over this hill over there. So yeah, it's definitely gonna be a little colder. Alright guys, so we'll see how it goes. We need to eat breakfast, like I said, go through our things and start doing what we need to do. I'll see you later. But it wouldn't be a proper adventure video if I didn't show you the highlights of our preparation process and how we even got here in the first place. So, first of all, the guns we're using are both brand new, so they need to be tested at the range. There's no two ways about it. After all, they are a very important part of our equipment. They're going to provide us with food, hopefully. So it felt like it was definitely a good idea to play with different loads and wads and whatnot, just to see what we can expect and maybe even make some little adjustments so that things like this wouldn't happen when the push comes to shove. Both of our guns were Pedersoli muzzle loaders. One was a 12 gauge shotgun and the other one was a 20 gauge Howdah pistol. And I'm no expert, so feel free to make fun of me if you see something stupid in the loading process, but I just thought it'd be nice to include the footage of me trying to load the shotgun, as I was actually learning on the job myself. I had never had any previous experience with a muzzle loading shotgun. So you can imagine that this was going to be a fair amount of stress for me in itself, having to operate a firearm that you've never used before and trying to use it to hunt successfully enough to be able to survive in a completely unknown environment. So what we're testing here essentially is a fairly sub-caliber ball, lead ball, with a substantial patch, as you can see, which is needed to basically just seal the whole thing in the barrel, because, I mean, the chokes here, I didn't have much choice. One is a full choke, the other one is modified choke, I believe. So the modified choke kind of made sense. It still was able to shoot those lead balls fairly accurately from, well, let's say, the semi-long distance for a shotgun, this kind of shotgun at least. So that was probably about 20 yards, 25 yards. That was still doable. But after a little more testing, we basically just decided to abandon this idea altogether and just go with buckshot if we were to, well, we knew we were gonna have to shoot a deer. If we're gonna stay there for a month, it was going to have to be a large animal such as deer. That's what we had our tags for. We also had tags for small game, but you know, shooting squirrels and grouse isn't exactly going to keep us alive for a month unless you shoot something twice or even 3 times a day, because there's 2 pretty big guys and a lot of calories being burned between us, so we knew it was gonna have to be something substantial. Zaraz obok. mostly. Dead. I think he dead. So what I'm explaining here in Polish is that we just arrived in Dixie, Idaho, and since at the time I was driving a Toyota Camry, as you can see, it's impossible for us to continue in my car. And we arranged with Silver Spur Outfitters to take us down to the river and bring us back when the whole trip is over. So now all we have to do is repack everything that we're taking with us and hop on in the truck. And here we are, back at the Salmon River in our first training camp. So this is one of few exceptions where we are allowed to bring some plastics and electronics. No power bank is actually big enough and light enough for us to bring on this trip. So what we're doing instead is we're bringing this little solar panel, and there behind it you can see my Garmin InReach, which we're bringing with us to use in an emergency or to call or contact the outfitters to bring us back. We have a lot of extra equipment in this camp that we are not taking with us, which means we're gonna have to find a proper place to leave it behind, store it, and secure it. And turns out that takes a lot of time to find that place, and we are not able to leave this camp as early as we expected. So we're gonna have to stay here for one more night, which I suppose is not a bad thing because we get to learn and practice and probably also acclimate a little, because this is, like I may have mentioned before, a little different climate and different environment. So our first camp was very sloppily put together. We didn't really think that through, and we even got surprised by rain in the middle of the night and had to put up our tarps because we didn't even have any roofs over our heads at first. So we just decided, since we're gonna stay here a little longer, why not practice and move the camp a little further back, set everything up properly this time, and make sure that we don't make the same mistake in the middle of the wilderness. And turns out we did all that just in time, because we had some frost at night. The time has finally come. We're putting away everything made of plastic and all
our extra food in bear-proof canisters, leaving it behind. We finally think we found the right place to store everything for the time we're gonna be away. So we'll see how that goes.
To się nagrywa?
So this is a little embarrassing, but we managed to move from the previous camp about half a mile. We know that the next suitable campsite is about 4 miles away on the other side of the Salmon River, but all this transporting of our extra equipment took us so long. It basically took an entire day, so we didn't have any time left to do any proper hiking, not to mention setting up another camp. But you know what? It's actually pretty nice here, so we get to stay here another night, not very far away from our previous campsite. We get to practice setting up our tarps and making beds and all that, so I guess it's all for the best. Believe it or not, but we actually did manage to leave the area eventually. Now we just need to get to the bridge at Campbell's Ferry and see what's on the other side of the Salmon River. This is where we're trying to get eventually. But first, let's cross the Salmon River. So, turns out, on the other side of the river there is a historic cabin, and we were allowed to stay there for a few days by the custodians, at least until we figure things out. And just to be clear, we're not exactly staying inside, because no one's staying inside. Like I mentioned, this is a historic place, so no one lives there. We were just allowed kindly to camp outside, under the roof on the porch, but not inside the cabin itself. It helped us a lot because, as always, it takes a lot of time to cover this much ground with heavy equipment, and by the time we reached this place, we had absolutely no time left for setting up camp, and we were very grateful to be able to spend the night under this roof on the porch. I probably should have mentioned, if I haven't already, that we are not using flashlights or headlamps unless it's absolutely necessary. So I don't have to tell you that this makes things a lot more complicated, especially at this time of the year. This was mid-October, and the day wasn't exactly very long at that point. It wasn't always enough, especially at first when we didn't really know what we were doing. From here to our next and possibly ultimate camp is only about 12 miles. A little bit along the river and over the mountains into the wilderness. But after a quick chat with our host the next morning, we quickly realized that things are not going to be as easy as we expected. First of all, it turns out the entire trip was going to be uphill. Second, and probably even more important, was the fact that there was going to be absolutely no water all the way up to our next potential campsite, which we hoped would be wet meadows. What's funny is that these places aren't even that far apart in a straight line. But unfortunately, we can't simply fly over the mountains and all the trees where there is no trail. This is a wilderness, folks, so even in places where there are cabins, people can only get to and from by boats, mules, planes, or helicopters. But even those modern modes of transportation aren't exactly risk-free. All it takes to crash your plane out here is a moment of inattention. We also want to make sure that we don't make any avoidable mistakes. So the plan for me for tomorrow is to go up there and do some scouting, see if the map's not lying and if there really isn't any water. You see, under normal circumstances, going 12 miles from one source of water to another isn't really a big deal. But because we don't really know our equipment very well right now, and because it's so heavy, we'd rather avoid overexerting ourselves at the very start of our journey. So, turns out there really isn't any water, at least not as far as I can tell. So, good thing I took 4 liters of water with me and planted it about 2 or 3 miles up the trail. That's the good news. The bad news is that we are still way too heavy. So, we need to adapt and overcome. So, the idea is to leave everything that we think we can still survive without. Unfortunately, that means leaving a lot of the food. So we're giving ourselves about 5 days once we're in wet meadows to make a kill a deer, And if we can't make it within the first 5 days, we're gonna have to turn around, come back, and resupply. There's something like an old barn here, and we're planning on hanging our stuff up under the roof. The problem with leaving our food here is that there's bear shit all over this place. Apparently they come here to feed on apples and nuts, and they just don't give a damn. And I mean, they're literally in our camp, like 6 feet away from where we sleep. But there's nothing I can do about that, so I'm just gonna focus on improving my backpack, because this thing is a real pain in the back and a true torture machine. And yes, you guessed it, I did it to myself. I made it out of bamboo sticks and canvas. I didn't test it before, at least not enough, so now I have to learn and improve it as I go. We're leaving tomorrow. See you soon.